AC Evo started with a bit of a rough launch, to say the least. It was supposed to release at 3 o'clock yesterday, United Kingdom time. It released 1 hour later, much due to a DDoS that was happening on the background that are still having impacts right now. As the game came in and we are able to play it, well, there are a lot of things we need to talk about. First of all, I understand this is an early access launch and early accesses are early access. However, if early access is a way to get the product out there for testing, that means these types of videos are actually useful for the developers because, you know, you end up voicing a lot of opinions and also a lot of problems that appear everywhere. I know early access, you can't really say it's the finished product, but if it's over here to testing without feedback, they can't do anything about it. Current price in Steam is £27 or $32 or 32 euros. This will be the cheapest it will ever be. It is with 20% discount or thereabout. It's a technique that Kunos as always has used. The first early access is always the cheapest, then the price continues to increase just a little bit. So this will be the cheapest you can get until launch. Of course, it will get cheaper in the future when the game is more mature. Let's talk about the overall experience out there. I'm going to start with the bad parts first because there are plenty of them, and then we move to the other parts that are actually good and a little bit hopeful for the future. So the first part that we see, it was actually the online access. There's a online only a part of this game that probably it's going to only get bigger, but it was very difficult to navigate at the start because I didn't know this until later. I couldn't understand why we only had access to certain types of content. So essentially, because of the DDoS, the servers were down. You could not access to the online part of the game. That included some content like cars. We only had access to 6 cars and all of the tracks, and you don't have access to the academy even today, the next day while I'm doing this. This means that in the future, when the game is totally launched, most of the game will probably be behind a online layer, much like Gran Turismo 7 is at the moment. That means if you're offline, basically a lot of the game won't be accessible. If this is to avoid piracy or something like that, I have no idea. For some of you, this will be very important and for very good reasons. Eventually, Kunos released a hot patch that gave access to all of the cars, which will be the 20 cars and the 5 tracks which were already available. But the Academy part of it and some of the things that you can save on your user interface weren't be available. You couldn't do anything with your profile and so on. So a lot of the game was still hidden behind the online only part. So we also need to speak about the user interface. The user interface as it is incredibly rough. It's not very difficult to navigate, but you know, especially when you try to assign buttons and something like that, it is incredibly difficult. There's fortunately a search part of the user interface for the settings, which is good, but still, you know, Assetto Corsa Competizione was a little bit easier to navigate. Even the original Assetto Corsa was a little bit easier to navigate than this. Of course, user interface may change in the future. It is incredibly rough at the moment, so that part of the experience may be still a little bit frustrating. Also frustrating will be the garage itself. The garage shows basically all the liveries together, so if you're looking for a car, you're not looking just for a car, you're basically looking to all the liveries put there, and instead of just looking for the car and selecting the liveries afterwards, you know, it makes it more bulky than it is, something that needs to change for the future. Now we need to talk about the graphics. This is going to be a big topic going forward, like it was with the Unreal Engine for Assetto Corsa Competizione, something that they have fixed 2 years later after it was launched. And this one, I think there's much more work to be done because this is an in-house engine. So it's a totally new engine for Assetto Corsa Evo. Assetto Corsa Competizione was Unreal Engine 4 and Assetto Corsa was their own as well. I can't say that this graphics that they presented are bad per se. There is a big issue in terms of performance to looks ratio, and it's very hard to try to balance everything together. What I find out is that if you try to raise some of the settings, the graphics don't seem to bump up very much, and you need to figure out what is good for you to get rid of the jaggies. Even if you get a lot of aliasing into this, there's always a lot of jaggies out there. That means you see a little bit of stairs and a little bit of flickering in the edges of basically everything. And some of the settings are incredibly intense on your performance. So what I also find out, especially if you're trying to use super sampling to get more performance out of this, is that, for example, with the DLSS, I'm using a 4070 on a 7700X. The DLSS is very much hit and miss, more on the miss part. Generally on DLSS, I tend to use quality to give me like 10% extra FPS. For generally the same quality of image generally, and I found out that between native resolution and DLSS quality, or especially ultra quality, there's zero advantage of using it, at least in my system with updated graphics. You know, your side must be different as well. So for DLSS quality, I would have, if 1 or 2% improvement, I would have that, and with ultra quality, the basically the quality or the performance of the game actually decreased. It's very hard to get a setting that will give you most of the time 80 or 90 FPS when you're standing alone. Sometimes you can get a setting that will give you 100 and 120 in certain circumstances, but when you add more cars, the quality and performance actually drops quite a lot. So it's, if you have 20 cars, which is generally normal when I use AI in Assetto Corsa Competizione or other games, well, the performance gives a big decrease. I'm not sure if they have the LEDs right, or if they can, you know, optimize all of this, but in terms of performance and in terms of quality settings, it's very hard to manage, so there's a lot of optimization going forward. As for the graphics themselves, this game is incredibly bipolar. In some circumstances it looks beautiful, reflections are beautiful, colors are super accurate, the details of everything are fantastic. In other circumstances you have a lot of pop-in. Something that I have mentioned in one video about the fog at this distance, it's basically there's foggy everywhere on a clear day, even if it's high noon when supposedly you shouldn't have that much dew in the air, that much humidity, including Laguna Seca. Everything is foggy at the distance with a lot of pop-in. Because of the quality settings, that it's very hard to get the good performance out of it. Some objects are very difficult to see normally. They become incredibly blurry, so you have a blurry mess at the distance, much as you did in Assetto Corsa Competizione, but I think it's even worse here, and close to you it's generally okay. Another issue that I found out, especially on Bathurst, is that the texture loads are very strange. That means if you are close to the roads, you have to stop a little bit until the better texture loads up. Otherwise, everything looks a little blurry. In some ways, it kind of reminds me of Forza, the last Forza that existed, where everything is strange when it's moving, and, you know, the roadside objects aren't as good. Another thing that I would actually recommend to them is that allow us to have a slider for roadside objects, because I really don't want to see, you know, the flinging arm man all around.
Wacky waving inflatable arm flailing tube man.
There's plenty of them. There's plenty of roadside objects, and the roadside objects look nice, but I don't want to see a lot of that, and I suppose that also lowers a bit of the performance. You know, less objects, generally you get more performance. Things that are not so good with the early access at the moment and need to improve: so UI, performance, the always online part, which is a big one, and difficult to have quality and performance in this game at the same time. But let's go to the parts that I'm hopeful for in the future, and that will be the Assetto Corsa part of Assetto Corsa Evo. So the Evo part, it will be the, you know, the academy, the free roam whenever it comes later in the year, and, you know, all of those new things. The Assetto Corsa part is the core part of the game, the handling, the same with Assetto Corsa Competizione. You got the Assetto Corsa part of it, and then the Competizione part of it. And if for Evo or Evo, whatever you want to call it, I'm actually very hopeful and very happy even now with what they delivered. I've tried most of the cars that are available at the moment. There are cars that are with the engine in the front, engine in the rear, race cars, front wheel driven cars, and all of that. And I must say that I'm actually impressed with the handling of pretty much everything that I've seen here, or basically everything that I've seen here. Evo is basically the first game that I've ever seen in sim racing that is made front wheel driven cars. So the stuff like the Hyundais, the i30 and the Golf GTI. Not only fun, but actually relatable to a very scary degree of accuracy. I've driven like the i30 around Brands Hatch Indy, and it was incredibly close to what I experienced I had with my own car, even though it's not the same car, in terms of handling in that circuit. Different car, different tires, but the core experience is exactly there. In terms of how the car responds in turn-in, in terms of how the rear ends up being loose, and the amount of counter steer we need to do in order to clear a corner if things go sideways, quite literally, and the way that the tires load up, and with all of the stuff, everything feels fun, everything feels connected, and the force feedback, very good force feedback. It is in a happy middle between the old Assetto Corsa and Assetto Corsa Competizione. It still requires a low interpolation, so low filtering on your steering wheel, because there will be some sort of general dampening, but it's not as present as before in Assetto Corsa Competizione. You do feel the tires loading, you feel the suspension working, you feel the rumbles, you feel the minute details of the handling, things that are even better than the old Assetto Corsa, but with some of the Assetto Corsa Competizione kind of thing, which probably means they want to do more simulation of the steering rack. Front wheel cars are fantastic. The Escort is an absolute beast. So is the Giulia. The Giulia is incredibly fun to drive around. The Porsche Cup is incredibly good, but I'm not too sure about the tire on the soft slick, and this was something that already was before in Assetto Corsa. The soft slicks seem to always have some sort of glue or honey on the tire treads. Very sticky, incredibly sticky, to a point that almost goes to beyond belief. But the road tires, the hypercar tires, they look very good, and even the eco tires, especially on a GR86, makes for an incredibly drifting car. And believe me, the handling for drifting is pretty much as it was in Assetto Corsa, in a regular Assetto Corsa. So you know how to drift in Assetto Corsa, you'll be happy here at Assetto Corsa Evo. It's very close. The race cars we have here are also pretty fun to go through. The Porsche, even though it has very sticky tires, it's really fun. It really connects to the roads. The BMW M2 CS kind of reminds me of the same we had in Assetto Corsa Competizione. Very good car, and it's very underrated car. But the MX-5, the MX-5 is great. It's a really great car. They have two versions. They have the sequential and the manual. And the manual car, it's also very close to Assetto Corsa. It's one of the best cars that Assetto Corsa had for the Kuno's content. Very good car, and I think when we have multiplayer, I think this car will be very popular. It's still popular, for example, in iRacing for very good reasons, and it will be probably for the same reasons it should be popular in Assetto Corsa Evo. So in terms of handling, in terms of force feedback, this game delivers. Of course, for the early access, you only have two things to do, which either practice or racing against the AI, and the AI is terrible. It's so bad. For example, in Suzuka, they always miss the first corner. They just go over the grass and they lose control, which is kind of good. They have some aggressiveness in them, which is also pretty good, but at the moment, it's absolutely terrible. You cannot rely on them for most of the races. Maybe in Brands Hatch with the MX-5, that was actually a really decent-ish experience, but don't expect the AI at this moment, or maybe even ever, because, you know, it's Assetto Corsa, to be to a point where it is at the level of the Sophie from Gran Turismo 7, even though Sophie in Gran Turismo 7 only like 5 or 6 tracks has that. But it won't ever, I think it won't ever get to that point. Maybe in a point in the future, maybe late this year, maybe even next year, maybe it will be serviceable, but I'm not expecting anything on the AI, which is something I never expected from Assetto Corsa, by the way. So this is hard, tough talk, I think. You have to be real about this. The game has its price. And for a lot of you, this won't be making sense at the moment. Of course, if you want to buy into this because you are hopeful for the future, just like I am, just like I did, well, it's okay for me that, you know, you spend some money on this, you actually have some experience out of this. But for a lot of you, probably don't want to wait. You just want, when in the future, if it's fixed, you buy it. Do I recommend the game at the moment? Well, not unless, like what I said before, you want to spend, you want to save some money in this, because at this moment, at this launch, it's pretty much like every single other launch from Assetto Corsa. Kind of a mess, even though Assetto Corsa's early access was a little better. In competition, it also felt a little bit better than this. It is very rough because there are so many layers of failure. New engine that has amazing performance problems, incredible performance problems. New UI that's kind of a mess, not difficult to navigate, but it still needs a lot. And then the always online parts that, you know, part of this early access experience was to experience the academy and, you know, the driver part of it, and it's really not there. So even though it's £27, unless you want to commit to this, I would say wait. Let us know in the comments what is your experience with Evo, performance, and all of that. Maybe find something that would be useful for you. Let us know also in the comments what is your reaction to all of this in Assetto Corsa Evo. And if you enjoy these hard but fair kind of videos, press like and subscribe, because basically that's what I do. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.